Okay.
You see that? That wasn't even on a thing. That was on her back leg.
Oh, hang on. I'm not on mute. We're trying to stop the dog stealing a second ice cream. Yeah, don't care.
John, Christmas stole an entire ice cream. She stole an entire ice cream. She just took it out of my hands.
That's okay, because it would have melted by the time you sent it to me in the post.
There's a spare one here if you want to come up.
Sounds like you have a spare dog at the moment.
Oh, no. It just went away.
Excuse me?
The strangest animal I ever had take something out of my hand was I was eating a sandwich and a chicken took it out of my hand. And
A chicken?
yes, very aggressive chicken.
Yeah.
Who says they're meek and mild? Okay, I think I will
She's
start.
fighting it again.
Okay, perfect.
Well, welcome, everyone. It is my pleasure and my slight terror to be here, to be sharing stories with you. But before I start, I want to acknowledge that these stories are coming from Toronto, which is the traditional lands of the Haudenosaunee people, the Wyandot and Mississauga. They are stories that inhabited this land before my ancestors came here, and I wish to recognize them and honor those stories as well. Now, so a good story is hard to burn, bury, or break, and that's what I hope to show in these stories. But before I do the first story, which is The Wooden Sword, a little story to whet your appetite. Once there was a king in Africa who was having a wee bit of a tiff with his wife. And so he sent instructions to the cook. I want you to bring to dinner tonight, when we have our feast, the best of food and the worst of food. Serve me the best, my wife gets the worst. And the cook sent back word, it will be done as you desire. And so that evening, the king was kind of rubbing his hands like, I mean, really, he's going to get the best and his wife's going to get the worst. And 2 plates were brought out, covered up, and boy, they smelt good. And one was placed in front of the king, and the other one in front of his wife. And the king lifted up his cover, and there was beautifully spiced, steamed on a bed of rice, beef tongue. Oh, it looked good. But his wife was lifting up her cover as well. And what did she discover on her plate? Steaming, smelling, and looking so good on a bed of rice, beef tongue. And the king called for the cook to come and explain himself. I asked you to give me the best and my wife the worst. And explain yourself. But I've done exactly what you asked, said the cook. I've given you the tongue, which is the best of foods. It instructs, it gives good advice, it tells stories. So that makes it the best of foods. Whereas your wife got the worst, because the tongue also gives bad advice. It slanders and it slurs, it leads people astray. And it is a king who has the worst of tongues that is not a good king. And he looked at the king. And the king smiled. He said, you have prepared a very good meal, he said to the cook. You may return to the kitchen. And he picked up his plate and exchanged it with his wife's. And from that time on, there was peace between the two of them. Once there was a king. Thank you. Once there was a king who went up and down the streets of his city, which happened to be also in North Africa. We travel a lot in these stories. And as he went up and down, instead of going in royal procession, he put on the clothes of a working man. And as he went up and down the streets, he listened to see and hear what the people really thought. For people do not speak truth to the king. But an ordinary working man, over a cup of tea, you can hear a lot. One evening he was going down in a section of the city he had not been to for a very, very, very long time. It was a street of sighs and sorrows. It was the poorest street in that poor section of town. And as he went past the houses, he could hear the people moaning and weeping in their poverty and their sorrow and their helplessness behind the doors. Oh, we're so hungry. But when he came to the last house on the street, instead of weeping and wailing, he heard yada-da-dee-um-pa, yada-da-dee-um-pa, yada-da-dee-um-pum-pa. Now, who could be so merry in such a miserable section of town? So he walked up to the door, he knocked, and a voice inside said, "Who's there?" "It's a stranger, and I'm hungry, and I'm cold," said the king in disguise. "Well, come in, my friend. Come in and share my meal. A guest is a gift from God. I have little, but I will share what I have." And the king opened up the door, and already there was a man pouring out the contents of a bowl into another bowl, and he set it down, and the two sat down and ate, and they drank, and they told each other stories and terrible jokes. And when they were finished, the king asked the question that was on his mind. "Excuse me, but how do you make your living?" "Well," said the man, "I make my living by going out in the street with my box of tools over there, and I mend, repair, and fix things. And each day, God willing, I make enough money to buy the food that we have shared." "And tomorrow?" asked the king in disguise. "Well, I take care of today," said the man. "God will take care of tomorrow." "You're a clever and wise man," said the king in disguise, and he left. But he decided to put that philosophy to the test. And the next day the proclamation went out from the palace. Nobody but the king's own soldiers were to mend, repair, fix things on the street of that city. And that evening, once again, he put on his disguise, and down and up and down the streets of the city, and he came to the street of sighs and sorrows, and he heard the people weeping and wailing. But when he came to that last door, he heard yada-da-dee-um-pa, yada-da-dee-um-pa, yada-da-dee-um-pum-pa. So he knocked on the door. "Who's there?" asked the voice within. "It's a stranger, and I'm hungry, and..." "Oh, come on in, my friend," said the man, and he recognized the voice. "Come and share my simple meal, for a guest is a gift from God." The king opened up the door, and already there was food laid out. And he sat down, and he ate, and he drank, and they told each other stories, and even worse jokes than nights before. Well, at the end of it, the king asked the question that was burning in his mind. "Excuse me, how did you make your living today when the king took away your livelihood?" "Oh," said the man, "well, when I heard that proclamation, I didn't know what to do. I just wandered up and down the streets of the city, and then I ran into some friends who are woodcutters. Wood's free, and I borrowed an axe from them. I went into the forest and chop, chop, chop. I had enough wood to sell in the marketplace to make enough money to buy the food we just ate. And tomorrow, I will take care of today," said the man. "God will take care of tomorrow." The king left, and next day, proclamation went out from the palace. Nobody but the king's own soldiers were to chop wood and sell it in the city. And that evening, once again, he put on this disguise. Once again, he went down the street of sighs and sorrows, and once more he heard the people weeping and wailing. But as he came to that last door, he heard yada-da-dee-um-pa, yada-da-dee-um, pa, yada da da bum pa, and he knocked on the door, knock, knock, knock. Oh, my friend, what delayed you? Asked a voice within. Come on in and share my meal. The king opened up the door, and there was the man with the food laid out. There was a candle. There was even a bottle of wine. So they sat down and they ate and they drank and they told stories. And when they were finished, the king in disguise asked the man, how did you make your living, make the money to buy the food that we have just eaten? You didn't? Oh, no, no, no. Well, I did something, said the man. And I'll tell you what it is. Confession is good for the soul. When I heard about this proclamation from the king, I was angry. How dare our king call himself wise and just when these proclamations go out? And so I went to the palace to complain. But when I got there, I found out that with the soldiers fixing things and chopping wood, there weren't enough soldiers. And so I enlisted. And I became a member of the palace guard. All I have to do is march up and down and up and down and not really do anything, not even put. And then the man paused. Now I must confess something to you. And do not tell anybody, for if the king were to find out, it would cost me my life. Go on, said the king in disguise. Well, we don't get paid until the end of the month. And I don't have any money. But I do have a good sword. I took the blade of that sword and I pawned the steel blade in the city. And I put a wooden blade in its place that I made with my tools. And now no one will know. And at the end of the month, I will redeem my sword and nobody will know what I have done. You are a very clever, wise, and resourceful man, said the king in disguise, and he smiled. And he left. The next morning, the man got up. He picked up his uniform and put it on. He took the sword, scabbard with a wooden blade inside of it. He slung it over his shoulder. He marched down the streets to the palace, and there the palace of the guard was giving you the city, fix things, you in the forest, chop wood. And when they were all gone except for the man, he said, you have a special duty. We have caught a thief. And the king says, for that he must die. You are to go down to the marketplace. You will find him with his head upon a chopping block. You are to take your sword of steel out and chop his head off as punishment for his crimes. The man said, what? But, I cannot do that. I cannot kill a man. I thought I would just march up and down and just wave my sword around every now and then. I could not kill a man. Oh, said the captain of the guard. Well, you know what my orders are? My orders are from the king himself. If you do not go out down to the marketplace and chop that thief's head off, I am to take my sword out right now and chop your head off. And what will that be? And the old man thought to himself, if I pull out the blade and they find out what I have done, I will die. And if I disobey an order of the king, I will die. What will I do? What can I do? I appeal to you, my friends. What can he do? Well, I didn't know either when I first heard this story from Alec Elser, but he told me. And the man said to the captain of the guard, very well, go to the marketplace, I will follow. The captain of the guard turned around and he marched down, and the man followed, thinking and thinking and thinking, and then he smiled. When they came to the marketplace, there's a huge crowd that parted when the captain of the guard showed up. And there in the middle of the square, there was a wooden block. And on the wooden block was the thin neck of the thief, wrapped up in chains. And when the thief saw the captain of the guard, he began to shiver and he began to shake, and the sound of the chains filled the silence of the market square. And the king looked down on his from his high throne and wondered, what's he going to do now? Well, the man marched up to the thief, and he looked down at him and said, be still and be at peace, my friend. Then he turned to the crowd and he said, my friends here, the king on his high throne over there said this man is a thief, and for that he must die. Well, God give me strength to take my sword of shining steel and chop his head off with one blow, if he's guilty. I would not want the blood of an innocent man upon my hands. And so if God says that this is an innocent man, then let God turn my sword of steel into a sword of wood. And he drew out the sword, and there, gleaming in the sun, was the wooden sword. And the people saw it, and they began to cry out, it's a miracle. It's a miracle. That is an innocent man. Let him free. Let him free. Let him free. And when the people speak with one voice, a king or a prime minister or a president must listen. So the thief was freed from his chains, and he disappeared, his rags flapping in the wind. And when he was gone, the king called for the man. The man marched over, and he saluted the king. For a moment he was silent. The king said, do not worry about your head, my friend. A head like yours should stay on its shoulders. You shall no longer be in the palace guard. No, you shall live in the palace itself as my chief counselor. And that's what happened. The man took off the uniform of the soldier, put on the robes of a counselor, and he gave much good advice for that king, and the kingdom prospered for many years. And each evening, as the king was walking among the flowers of his garden, resting from the labors of the day, he could hear from the palace on a soft evening breeze, yada-da-da-yum, 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 the wooden sword.
Yeah, it's a great story.
Brilliant story.
Good. Okay. Well, we're in Africa, but we're going to do a bit of travel. Oh God, where'd that awful accent come from? So the next story is an original story, and before I tell it, I want to tell another story from Africa just before we leave, because I love the stories of that country. A king called his 3 sons to him. When the time for me to go has come, I want one of you to be the leader in my place, and the other 2 shall be their advisors. And I will give you a test. Each of you shall be given a sufficient gold to build a house, whatever house you want, as big a house as you want. And in 30 days' time, the one who has built the best house will be king after me. And the other 2 shall be the advisors, because you're all very good young men. Well, the first 2 sons took their gold and they ordered fine timbers from far away. And there was banging and building, and roofs were going up and outbuildings, all sorts of wonderful things. And what did the 3rd son do? Well, the 3rd son just took the gold and he went from village to village and the village and village of the kingdom. And there he would throw a feast. And then when the feast was going on, he would call out, a story, and the people would cry out, "If you have a story, let it free." And so he would tell stories, and others would share stories as well. And when the meal was done and stories were done, he would go on to the next village. And this is what he did for 30 days. And finally, at the end of the 30 days, the first two sons and the third came to their father, the king. He said, "Father, Father, let us show you what we have done." And the father came to the first house. Oh, it was magnificent. It was beautiful. "You have done well." The second son showed a house that was the equal of the first. "You have done beautifully, and you have done well," said the king. And the third son said, "Father, I have no house other than I went from village to village to village, and I told and I listened to stories, and I threw feasts." And the king smiled and he said, "My son, you are the one that have built the best house. For you are the one that's gone to every house in my kingdom, and there you will be welcomed at every single one of those houses, because you are a storyteller as well. You have the best house. There's no place that you will not be welcome. And you also know your people and be a good king." And so the king, the youngest son, became the king. And the two others, well, they had two magnificent houses each. They were advisors to the king, and I guess everybody was happy, including the storyteller who just told you this story.
Mm.
Canada is a country of immigrants. Before that, there was the first people. And I don't have any of those stories, but I have this story called The Oak and the Stream. And one day I was walking along, and somehow this story just dropped into my mind and my heart. The sails were raised. The sailors were running to and fro, calling to each other with shouts and cries. And deep in the hold in the darkness, the people were waiting for the ship, the brand new ship, newly built, to take them away across the ocean. Two of them, young girl, Sarah and Rachel. Rachel was 14, young for us, but already a young woman. And in her arms, Sarah wept and cried, and it seemed to Rachel as if all the sorrow in the world was in that weeping. "Hush, hush, my little sister, hush. I want to go home." "We can't," said Rachel, remembering the smoking ruins that they had left behind. "We can't go home. Never." "Oh, hush, little Sarah. Can I tell you a story?" And a nod in the darkness, a shift in the snuggle said yes. But Sarah didn't know what story to tell. Rachel didn't have a story. And then she reached into her pocket and she felt a little acorn, the only thing that she'd been able to bring with her. And holding that acorn, she began to speak. "Once there was a little acorn that hung upon a great oak, and a wind blew, shh, and the acorn went flying through the air, and it went bounce, 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 and it was caught by a squirrel, and the squirrel ran off and ran and ran, and then it buried that acorn. It buried it deep. And then it ran off. And in time, when the rain fell and the sun shone, the little acorn began to grow. It grew up into a sapling. And it was near a stream, a sparkling silver stream that sang a beautiful song. And that oak sapling fell in love, that stream. And it grew taller and greater, and the stream flowed from where it did not know to where it did not know. But as it grew, it became the home to birds and animals, and it dropped acorns of its own, and a forest of oak trees grew up around it with other trees, ash and pine, until at last it was the greatest tree in a forest of oaks. And now it could no longer see the stream that it loved, but it could hear it, still singing. And then one day there came a new sound to the forest, not the sound of birds or animals, but the sound of axes, chopping and chopping and chopping. And as then the great trees were striking the ground, and the earth was shaking with the blows of the trunks hitting the ground, until at last they came to the last tree, the greatest tree, the great oak. And it too was cut down, and it was taken away. And the oak thought to itself, I was once a sapling and once an acorn. What shall become of me? Well, they took that oak tree down to the great city, a port city, and there it became a keel of a great ship. And the other trees became ribs and decking and masts, until at last there was a ship ready to sail across the ocean, my little sister, said Rachel. And that ship, the sailors were running to and fro, and the sails were filling with air, with the wind. And then the wind took the ship out into the bay. And in the bay, the ship swayed back and forth. And as the ship sailed over the waters of the bay, fed by streams and rivers, it heard the voices of the rivers and the streams. But in the sound and the cacophony of the sounds of the rivers and the stream, it heard one voice that it knew and remembered, the voice of the stream that it loved. And so, in the arms of the one it loved, my little sister, the ship sailed across the ocean to a new land. And as she finished the story, she could hear that her sister was sleeping, and the wind was taking them across the land to a new home, a new destination, and a new story.
Mm. Mm.
You know, this is the story of many people. And I think of my own Irish ancestors. I think of the people right now who have left their land. And what is it that keeps them going? What is it that allows us to grasp a seed and plant it in the hopes of a future, whatever? Well, I like to think, for me, there's many endings for that kind of the story I just told, and the storyteller can come up with a lot of them. But my thought is that somewhere there is a place where there's a great oak tree, and underneath that tree there's an old woman, and around that old woman are young children saying, Grandma, tell us a story. She would listen to the wind and the leaves of the oak tree and say, once upon a time. Before we come to that, I have a very short story to tell. I heard it from Jean herself. And then when I'm finished that, I will go into the final story, which is the little yellow bird. Now, Jean was 10 years old back in the 1950s, at the height or the depth, if you will, of the plague of the day, polio. It was a death sentence. This was before there was a vaccine. And considering it was Jean that told me the story, there has a happy ending, right? Well, Jean was lying in her bed, breathing. That was about it. She was so deep in a coma, there was no medicine that could bring her back. And so they were holding a death watch. And I don't know what it's like to have to sit beside a child, listening to their breathing, listening for the breath to come in and the breath to go out, and hoping that that next breath comes in, dreading the silence that would last an eternity. Well, this one person just couldn't stand just sitting there. And there happened to be a book sitting by. We don't know the book. We don't know the story. But the person picked it up and began to read it. Why read to a near corpse? Well, it passed the time. Well, the watch ended, and the next person took their place, and without finishing the story, whoever it was just put it down, and the next person sat down to wait, to listen for that final silence that was the beginning of eternity for this 10-year-old child. And suddenly they heard, "You didn't finish the story. I want to hear the rest of the story." Shock, consternation, running around, and Jean made a full recovery. She woke up from her coma. And she told me this story many years later. And now I've told it to you. Never underestimate the power of any story. Even a story where the person who's telling it doesn't know that the person who's hearing it and doesn't finish it. It's a story, and a story has power. This is one of the favorite stories I used to tell at the Sparrow Garden, which is an outdoor program, and the more kids, the merrier. Once there was a hunter, and he went into the forests of Thailand. And he would shoot at the animals, he would shoot at the birds, he would even shoot at the bugs for target practice. In short, he terrorized that forest. And one day he went into the forest, and the forest was silent. So he went deeper and deeper and deeper into the forest. And he came to a clearing. And in the clearing there was this huge tree. And in that huge tree there was a little yellow bird. And as soon as the little yellow bird saw the hunter, the little yellow bird stared at that hunter, winked at that hunter, and went, "Nya, nya, 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 nya." That is a terrible insult in Thailand. Only children insult each other that way. And the hunter said, "I'm a great and powerful hunter. You can't insult me that way." And he took an arrow out, he drew it back, and he shot that little yellow bird right through the heart. But that's not the end of the story. For when the hunter went down, as the bird fluttered down and lay there on the ground, and he touched that arrow to pull it out, the little yellow bird opened up both of its eyes, stared at the hunter, winked at the hunter, and went, "Nya, nya, 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 nya." The hunter was angry. How dare that little bird do it again? And he took the little yellow bird, he broke it up into 100 pieces, and he scattered them around, and he said, "That's the end of that little yellow bird." But as soon as he said that, from every single piece of little yellow bird, he could hear louder than ever, "Nya, nya, 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 nya." The hunter was furious. He ran around. He gathered up every single piece of the little yellow bird. He dug a deep hole. Dig, 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 dig. He buried that little yellow bird. Bury, bury. And that's the end of that little yellow bird. But as soon as he said that, from deep inside the earth, very faintly, but very, very clearly, he heard, the hunter turned purple. He dug up that little yellow bird, and he chopped down a tree, and he made a bonfire. And he threw the little yellow bird on top of the bonfire. And the flames went crackle, 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 high into the sky. And burnt down, crackle, crackle, crackle to ashes. And then, just to make sure, he scattered those ashes all around to the four winds. Whoosh, all over the trees. He listened. There was silence. And he turned to leave. And he stopped. And he turned around. And his eyes opened wide. For what did he see? On every single twig, of every single branch, of every single tree, there was millions upon billions upon trillions of little yellow birds. And every single one of those little yellow birds stared at the hunter. And every single one of those little yellow birds winked at the hunter. And every single one of those little yellow birds went, "Nya, nya, 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 nya." The hunter screamed. He broke his bow over one knee. He snapped his arrows over the other knee. And he ran, and he ran, and he ran, and he ran. He ran until he came to a mountain in the Himalayas. And there he became a vegetarian Buddhist. And he would sit in front of the simple hut that he had built for himself. And as the people went by, he would say to them, "Be kind to the birds. Be kind to the animals. But especially be kind to little yellow birds." And that's the story of the little yellow bird.
Yeah, love it.
Love it, love it.
Well, there are many names that bird has been given. You can choose the name you want. Strength, freedom, story. It is up to us. A bird can be many things. It can fly many places, as can a story. So thank you for listening, allowing me to share my stories, some of my favorite stories. Thank you, John, for giving me the opportunity and a little bit of the nudge to finally do this. And and that's it.
Well,
Lovely.
thank you, Norman. Lovely session. Round of applause for Norman. And I really have to announce what's coming up next week at the on the cafe, because we've got a brilliant week. It starts tomorrow. We've got Shelley Vima at 2:00. It's the first time on the cafe. She's there at 2:00. In the evening at 6:00, and all at UK times. And you work out wherever you are in the world. You know, just Google what 6:00 or 6 p.m. in the UK is. So it's at 6:00. We've got the magazine program, Connecting the World by Story, and this we do a different theme every week. And this week it's story and song, and so we've got I've got to get up my prompt here. So we've got Cass from Wales, we've got Orla from Ireland. She's bringing her friends to this too. So with some and Pauline from Scotland, we're doing. So there'll be a great deal of balladeering. and some modern stuff as well. And then we got Roy McLeod from the Borders. He's letting me use a pre-recorded thing because he lives out in the. He's more wild than Rika, you know. He's sort of out in the middle of nowhere with no
Anyone be
internet at all. And but Rika's coming on with a song from Finland, and Zakia from Fez in Morocco. So we are truly warping around the world. Bianca, how's your voice? Haven't got anyone from Romania.
No.
No. Of course, Julio's not shy at all, you know.
No, Julio has a good voice. He can sing.
Can he?
Julio should sing.
You got 24 hours to persuade him. And, well, those are the people that, and when we're looking at how, you know, the different ways of conveying stories, and song is one way of conveying a story. So we've got, so Rory's got one that he wrote in March, and it's about our current situation, and we're going right back to the ancient ballads. Orla promised me that she won't do a 300-verse Irish ballad. I wouldn't mind actually, but I suspect other people will come in with their own songs, and in theory, it'll last 3/4 an hour. But you know, and Bianca, don't promise your families you're going to meet them any time tomorrow night, because it's a song session. It could go on forever. Mike, you're in for a long night, and Tuesday night. It was postponed from the other week, and we got Dave Tong doing his book launch, and then we'll go, and I'm just going to get my other prompt piece of paper here. So Friday, let's see, where are we? Boom. Yeah. Oh, we've got a new program, an interactive program starting on Wednesday with Sarah Corbett, who does our social media, and she's now got an intro. And then Friday we've got Justin Demir live. Saturday Giles again with his Viking stories and with drawings with it. And Yusuf Sunday, I'm really looking forward to this. And next Sunday night, going around the world, you know, we started with Norman around the world. Sunday nights is definitely going to be international tellers. So Norman, you kick this off this week, bless you. So we go down to Yusuf Jallo we've not managed to get to sub-Saharan Africa so far, but we will next Sunday. He might not be living there, but that's his heritage, and that's where he's from, and that's where he travels, and that's where he tells stories. And I won't go on to the next week because it gets even more exciting the next week, but I'm going to announce that next Sunday night. So I'll see you all tomorrow night. That is, you know, and wherever you are in this world, you know, come. When I've got through the people I've booked, come, as long as it's got a story to it. Sing a song. And so thank you all. Thank you, Norman.
Thank you, Norman.
Hello, everyone.
Mike, Julio, Bianca, everyone for
Bye.
listening.
See you tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow.